Thanks for joining me in this segment of Belly Flopping into Mysticism. My name is Penny Colpin. I'm continuing on with the series of better metaphors and analogies. This is segment 8, which I call Eliminating Toxicity. This is a fairly short one, I think. Have just a few examples, and feel I should warn you, actually, before I do that, I'm trying to remember, this is not medical advice or anything like that. This is just me sharing some ideas. Isn't it sad that I have to say that? And actually, I don't know if I have to say that, but whatever. Anyway, um, this one you may consider to be kind of gross. I'm sorry, but the metaphors are not bad for the type of process, or at least that I can relate to them based on the experiences I've had. So the first one is that of a burst appendix, right? Is something happens to this appendix and it blows up. Now, could that be from disease? Maybe, but ultimately the idea that there's toxicity there. And then what needs to happen is the toxicity needs to be dealt with. Okay, as best it can, you want to remove it, or at least remove that energy, that negative energy, whether it's rage or whatever, needs to be removed. And then pieces can be put back together. I'm reminded again from John Weir Perry's book, The Far Side of Madness. He had a program similar to the Soteria House, where people who were diagnosed with, I think what they call it is first stage or first phase schizophrenia. This was back in the 70s. And he said it was a place where mostly young people, I would guess early 20s, could go for a period of time and get help in working through this process. And the people there, there's usually one psychiatrist for the house, and then they had people trained in how to support people through this process. Well, John Weir Perry mentioned that he said it was key, or he said it was important to have a room dedicated to creativity. He mentioned specifically things like music and dance and the creative side of things. I imagine it would include drawing or painting or something like that. A room should also be dedicated for quiet reflection and introspection. And he said there must be a room dedicated to rage. That, as I understand it, I forget the quote specifically, but basically it's where someone could go. And I imagine that the people in the house understood what this room was for. And an attendant may, want to be close just to be on hand in case the person needs help. But my understanding is it was a place to go and invent and rage and yell and scream and curse. And presumably they had things in there that could be destroyed. I would imagine that there were rules that say, no, you can't whack the sheetrock of the walls and stuff like that. I mentioned it to a friend of mine a couple weeks ago, and she said that a friend of hers in California knew of places like that. I mean, you go and you pay for it, and you can go in. They have a number of things apparently that you can destroy or something. I don't know exactly. But back in the 1970s, the book I mentioned, The Far Side of Madness, was published in 1974. And that was something that even at that time, they recognized there's a place where this rage needs to go or needs to be released. And so again, the burst appendix could be a metaphor for some people. Now here's the one that, yeah, it might be gross, sorry, but frankly, even vomiting, projectile vomiting, something happens so quickly and you just throw up. Okay, it's gross, I get it. But now, did that happen because of an illness, or did that happen maybe because a person ate something and this was a response to something that either did not sit well in their system or made them ill or something like that? But again, you clean up the mess, or you deal with the mess, you deal with the ugliness of that. But to be gross, you don't scoop it all back and try and put it back where it came from. You recognize, hey, this needs to be removed. This needs to come out. It's healthy to have it come out. And people end up having compassion for people going through that type of process, but not when there's such negative, in quotes, energy, anger, disgust. We don't deal with that very well, I would say, as a culture. So here's one that might make you kind of laugh is I don't actually have cable, but when I'd go visit my mom before she passed, she did have cable. And so I learned of the TV show on TLC, Dr. Pimple Popper. Now, I don't know that I'd be called what she calls a popaholic. Dr. Pimple Popper, her name, I believe, is Sandra Lee, is involved with helping people with cysts, lipomas, different bumps, different skin conditions. I believe her office is in Southern California. And it's fascinating what the body will do in terms of, instead of shedding old, dead skin cells, sometimes it'll throw it into a sack, and people who come in will have these bumps and things for years before they seek help. And sometimes there's liquid in there, sometimes there's kind of a gooey mess, sometimes it's a lipoma where it's much more gelatinous. But the idea is, and I wouldn't necessarily call this a toxin, but it is something that did not get processed in the way it should have or could have. And so it needs additional help in getting it removed. Okay. And one of the things she always says is that if you don't remove the sac of these cysts, it'll just grow back. And so as part of this process of dealing with this eruption of material or what have you, as I said, I look at these analogies to be along the line of dealing with the contents of the shadow. That a few years ago, I was calling the shadow, I called it the pus-filled infected trauma ball. This was the glass ball that I thought I was letting things roll off my back, but actually it was getting shoved into this glass ball. I consider that kind of this pus-filled infected trauma ball. That is, over time, the contents get even worse and sludgier and, I don't know, gross, okay? And at some point, that either erupts or it needs to be dealt with. It adversely affects people. And so again, these are just a few metaphors and analogies could be useful. If you're working with someone or, they might come up with it and you can recognize, oh, yeah, this is something that a way of describing this intense experience. So again, just a few of them. This was a short video, but I thought I'd throw them out in there because they do kind of categorize a little bit. And in the meantime, I hope you have a great rest of your day. And thanks for joining me. Like, share, subscribe. See, I'm remembering to do this, even though it kind of ticks me off that I'm supposed to do that all the time. But anyway, thanks again for joining me. Have a great day.